the day I turned my harasser's complaint against her. I never thought I'd be sitting in an HR office defending myself against a harassment complaint from the very person who'd been tormenting me for 3 months. But there I was, armed with 16 signed witness statements and a photocopy of my employment contract, about to execute what some would call the perfect workplace revenge. Though honestly, it wasn't revenge, it was just documentation. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. 4 years before all of this happened, when I was just 24 years old, my mother died of breast cancer. It was devastating, brutal, and watching someone you love deteriorate like that changes you. But what made it worse was the knowledge that both of my grandmothers had also died from breast cancer, 3 generations. The pattern was impossible to ignore. After my mother's funeral, I sat alone in my apartment and made a decision. I needed to know if I was carrying the same death sentence. I scheduled an appointment with a specialist for a screening. The screening found something, not cancer, not yet, but cells in one of my breasts that could turn cancerous at any moment. The doctor used words like precancerous and high risk and family history indicates. The doctor laid out my options, and honestly, none of them were good. Option 1, regular screenings every 3 or 4 months. Just wait and watch, living with constant anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Option 2, a single mastectomy on the affected breast. That would remove the immediate threat, but I'd still need to monitor the other breast closely. Option 3, a bilateral mastectomy. Remove all breast tissue from both breasts, essentially eliminating the risk entirely. I sat with those options for weeks. Every night I thought about my mother. I thought about how she'd fought, how the treatments had ravaged her body, how in the end it hadn't mattered. I chose the bilateral mastectomy. Some people thought I was overreacting. You don't even have cancer yet, one well-meaning friend said, but they hadn't watched their mother die. The surgery was scheduled. The doctors assured me that scarring would be minimal, that I'd barely notice once everything healed. They were wrong. When the bandages finally came off, when I first saw what my chest looked like, I wasn't prepared. 2 huge scars, one on each side of my chest. Bright pink, jagged, raised. Each one was about 1 inch long and half an inch wide. They looked angry, like wounds that refused to heal properly. They were impossible to ignore, impossible to hide under most clothing. I fell into a severe depression. I stopped leaving my flat except for absolute necessities. I threw out every mirror in my home because I couldn't stand catching glimpses of myself. I stopped seeing friends. I stopped dating. I stopped living, really. Getting dressed became a nightmare. Taking showers made me physically ill. I couldn't look at my own body without crying. The scars weren't just physical, they were psychological. Every time I saw them, I was reminded of death, of cancer, of my mother's final days. Finally, at the urging of a friend, I made an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'll never forget our first session. I sat in her office and sobbed for 45 minutes straight. "I don't usually do this," she said carefully at the end of that session, "but I think you should consider seeing a plastic surgeon." I was taken aback, but Dr. Chen explained that sometimes trauma is so tied to a physical reminder that no amount of cognitive work can overcome it. Sometimes fixing the physical issue is the psychological solution. The plastic surgeon, Dr. Williams, examined my scars and talked through the options. He mentioned implants. Breast implants would not only restore the shape that had been taken by the mastectomy, but would also hide the scars completely. Before the mastectomy, I'd been an F-cup. Dr. Williams suggested we go slightly smaller to a DD. The surgery would be expensive, I'd have to go private, but the thought of hiding those scars, of being able to look at myself again, was worth any cost. I had the implant surgery 3 months after my first therapy session, and when the swelling went down, when I could finally see the results, I cried, but this time they were tears of relief. The scars were hidden. I could look at myself in the mirror without feeling sick. I could wear normal clothing. I could exist in my own body again. My mental health improved dramatically, the depression lifted, my confidence returned, I got my life back, I finished my degree, I got a job at a good company, I moved forward. Until Jill. It's a normal Tuesday afternoon at the office. I'm 28 years old now, 4 years past the surgery, and I'm working as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm in London. I'm in the break room with Emma, who's been my friend since university. We're planning a holiday to Spain, looking at flights on her phone, just normal friend conversation. Emma makes a joke, "Make sure you get the travel insurance. Last thing you need is your implants setting off the airport scanners." It was a stupid joke. We both laughed, a reference to something that had happened years ago. Except Jill was standing right behind us. Jill, a coworker in accounting who had maybe spoken to a handful of times. Jill, who had apparently been eavesdropping. "Wait, you've had a boob job," Jill said loudly. Emma and I both turned around. Jill was staring at my chest with this expression I can only describe as gleeful malice. "That's really none of your business," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh my God, you totally have," Jill continued louder now. "I knew something looked off. They're so obviously fake." My face was burning. Emma was telling Jill to back off, but Jill was on a roll. She made a few more comments before I grabbed Emma and we left. By the end of the day, that bad feeling was confirmed. At least 6 different coworkers approached me, asking about my boob job. Jill had told everyone. The entire office, all 45 people, knew by 5 o'clock that I'd had breast implants, and none of them knew why, because Jill hadn't overheard that part. I was furious, but I told myself it would blow over. I was very, very wrong. The comments started immediately, little remarks from Jill whenever I was within earshot, not directly to me, that would be too obvious. No, she'd say things to other coworkers while making sure I could hear. The first week, she told someone in the lift that I must be so insecure to get cosmetic surgery. The second week, she referred to me as Barbie while talking to someone at the coffee station. It escalated from there. Every few days, there would be another comment, another joke, another reminder. "More plastic than Barbie," she said once, loud enough for half the office to hear. "Fake in 2 ways," she said another time. Emma told me Jill had referred to me as a sack of silicone while I wasn't around. The worst part was Jill had created this narrative that I'd somehow gotten my boob job for free on NHS taxpayer money, that I was some kind of benefits cheat. It wasn't true, of course. The mastectomy had been NHS, but I'd gone private for the implants. I'd paid for it myself. After a month, I'd had enough. I approached Jill in the women's bathroom and asked her politely to stop making comments about my body. "I don't know what your problem is," I said, "but I'd appreciate it if you'd stop discussing my medical history with the entire office." Jill looked at me with fake innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just joking around." "Well, your jokes aren't funny," I said. "Please stop." She shrugged, "Sure, whatever." The comments didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. I approached her again in the lift a few weeks later, same result, then a 3rd time in the bathroom, then a 4th time in the stairwell. Each time I was careful to be polite but firm, and each time she'd give me that same fake apology and continue harassing me. Every single one of these conversations happened in places without cameras. The lift, the bathroom, the stairwell. Jill was either very lucky or very calculated. I started documenting dates and times in my phone. I didn't know if I'd need this information, but some instinct told me to keep track. For 3 months, I endured Jill's harassment while documenting everything and trying to maintain professionalism. Then came the lunchroom incident. It was a Wednesday. I decided to risk eating in the lunchroom because I was tired of sad desk lunches. There were 6 of us at the table. Me, Jill, Emma, and 3 other coworkers named Marcus, Priya, and Tom. We were having a normal conversation about a project deadline when the topic shifted to social media influencers. Marcus was talking about how shallow Instagram culture had become, and I made some comment agreeing with him. Before anyone else could respond, Jill jumped in. "You'd know all about being shallow," she said, gesturing directly at my chest with this smirk on her face. The table went silent, and something in me just snapped. 3 months of harassment, 3 months of asking her politely to stop, 3 months of being professional while she made me the butt of her jokes. I was done. "Do you know why I have these?" I said, my voice steady but loud enough that nearby tables could hear. "A few years ago, doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. Because my mother and both grandmothers died of breast cancer, I was advised to get a mastectomy to remove the risk. I did. I was left with huge, ugly scars that sent me into such a severe depression that I couldn't function. I saw a therapist who referred me to a cosmetic surgeon. The surgeon suggested implants to cover the scars, and I got them so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. I stood up, gathering my lunch. the entire cafeteria had gone quiet. So maybe, I continued, looking directly at Jill, next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first. I walked out, my hands were shaking, but I felt this strange sense of relief. For the rest of the day, my coworkers were divided. About a third approached me to offer support. The other two-thirds thought I'd overreacted and humiliated Jill by calling her out publicly. Then at 4:30 that afternoon, I got an email from HR. Subject line, meeting request. The email requested my presence at 10 o'clock the following morning to discuss a workplace conduct matter. The email was signed by Debbie, Jill's friend in HR. I called immediately. The receptionist mentioned something about a complaint regarding a hostile work environment. Jill had reported me. After 3 months of harassing me, she'd reported me to HR for creating a hostile work environment. But as I sat there, my shock turned into determination. If Jill wanted to escalate this to HR, fine, but I wasn't going into that meeting unprepared. That evening, I went home and pulled out my employment contract. I started reading carefully, looking for anything that might help me. On page 23, I found it. In the event of a formal complaint being filed, the employee who is the subject of said complaint has the right to request an impartial overseer if they believe the assigned HR representative has a conflict of interest. An impartial overseer. I could request a different HR representative if I could prove Debbie was biased. I photocopied that page, highlighting the relevant section. Then I opened Facebook Messenger and started typing. I messaged everyone who had approached me that afternoon to offer support, about 20 people. HR has asked to see me tomorrow morning. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me about my appearance? Are you willing to write and sign a statement saying what you heard and when? I sent the message and waited. Over the next hour, responses started coming in. Some people said they couldn't help, worried about retaliation. I understood. But others said yes. About 20 people said they were willing to help. I stayed up until midnight preparing. I wrote out a timeline of the 4 times I'd confronted Jill. I wrote out a list of everyone present at the lunchroom incident. I compiled everything into a folder, the highlighted contract page, my timeline, my witness list, and space for the written statements. I barely slept that night. I got to work at 7:30 the next morning. The office was nearly empty. I made coffee and waited. Around 8 o'clock, people started arriving. I approached each person who had agreed to help. I explained what I needed, a simple statement documenting what they'd heard Jill say when they'd heard it. Within an hour, I had 16 printed and signed letters. The letters followed a similar format. My name is name, on date at approximately time, I spoke with Jill, during which she referred to my name as specific insult. I felt this was inappropriate. I am willing to go on record that Jill has been discussing my name in a derogatory manner for approximately 3 months, creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Some letters included additional details. It turned out Jill had a habit of commenting on people's appearances. She'd made remarks about another coworker's weight. She'd made an anti-Semitic comment about someone's nose. I organized all 16 letters into my folder. At 9:45, I stood up from my desk. Emma squeezed my hand as I walked past. "Good luck," she whispered. I walked to the HR office with my folder clutched against my chest. When I walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, Debbie was standing at her desk. There was one other HR representative in the reception area, a man named Steve. This was it. This was my chance. "So is my meeting with you then," I said to Steve, my voice friendly. Debbie turned around sharply. "No, you're with me." I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, but that won't work for me." Debbie's expression hardened. "Excuse me." I pulled out the photocopy of my contract. My contract states that I have a right to an impartial overseer in complaint proceedings. You're friends with Jill, who I believe filed this complaint, so I'm exercising my contractual right to request a different HR representative. I held out the contract page so Debbie could see it. Debbie scanned the highlighted section. "I can be impartial," she said stiffly. "I'm sure you can," I replied, "but I have it on good authority that you and Jill are friends outside of work, and my contract explicitly allows me to request an impartial overseer. This is my right." Debbie's face was turning red. She marched to the office of the HR supervisor, Richard. I heard raised voices behind the closed door. A moment later, Richard emerged, looking tired. "Miss Last Name," he said, "can you explain why you believe Debbie cannot be impartial?" "I have it on good authority from multiple sources that Debbie and Jill are close friends. They have lunch together regularly. I don't feel confident I'll receive an unbiased review, and my contract gives me the right to request an impartial overseer." Richard turned to Debbie. "Is it true that you and the complainant are friends?" Debbie's jaw was clenched. "I can be impartial regardless of personal relationships." That wasn't a denial. Richard caught it too. "Steve," he said, "I'm going to need you in this meeting. All four of us will review the complaint together." He gestured toward a meeting room. I followed. Richard started with questions, and I could tell this was going to be thorough. He, Steve, and even Debbie took turns asking me questions. "You said you think Jill reported you," Richard began. "Why?" "Jill has had an issue with me for approximately 3 months," I said calmly. "I believe she filed this in retaliation for me finally standing up to her." "Why didn't you come to us when you realized Jill had an issue?" Steve asked. "I attempted to resolve it informally first, which is what the employee handbook suggests." "What issue does Jill have with you?" Richard asked. This was it. I took a breath. 4 years ago, a medical specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. Due to my family history, my mother and both grandmothers died of breast cancer. I was at extremely high risk. I chose to have a bilateral mastectomy. This is all documented in my medical records, which you have on file and which you have my full permission to review. I paused. Richard was taking notes. "The mastectomy left me with significant scarring. I developed severe depression and sought therapy. My therapist referred me to a plastic surgeon who recommended breast implants to cover the scars. I had the surgery privately. All of this is documented in my medical history." Approximately 3 months ago, Jill overheard a private conversation where my implants were mentioned. By the end of that day, Jill had told the entire office that I'd had cosmetic surgery. She did not know about the cancer history. "Why do you believe this is true?" Richard asked. I reached into my folder and pulled out the 16 letters. Here are signed statements from 16 different coworkers. Each one documents conversations they had with Jill where she discussed my implants, made derogatory comments, or shared my private medical information. The statements include quotes, dates, and times. I spread the letters out on the table. Richard's eyebrows climbed higher as he skimmed through them. "These also document other instances of Jill making inappropriate comments about other coworkers' appearances," I added. Steve picked up a letter and read it thoroughly. "These are very detailed." "Walk me through what you think led to this complaint," Richard said. "The harassment began 3 months ago, but the specific incident happened yesterday at approximately 12:15 p.m. in the lunchroom." I pulled out my witness list. There were 6 people at the table. We were having a conversation when I used the word shallow in reference to social media. Jill said, and I quote, "You know all about being shallow," while gesturing at my chest. I'd reached my breaking point. For 3 months, I'd asked her privately to stop, so I responded by explaining my medical history. I ended by suggesting that maybe she should ask people why they've had cosmetic surgery before judging them. "The lunchroom has cameras," I added. "You should be able to pull up the footage." "Had you had conversations with Jill prior to this?" Steve asked. "Yes, 4 separate times over the 3 months. I pulled out my timeline. I've noted approximate times and locations. I walked them through each conversation: the bathroom, the lift, the stairwell. Each time I communicated that I was uncomfortable and would appreciate if she'd stop. Each time she said she would. Each time the comments continued." "Why did these conversations happen in locations without cameras?" Debbie asked sharply. "Because those are the places where I happened to encounter Jill when I'd had enough of the most recent comment," I said evenly. "I was trying to resolve the issue informally, as the handbook suggests, before escalating to HR." Richard nodded slowly. "Was Jill made aware of your cancer history at any point during these 3 months?" "No," I said firmly. "I didn't tell her because it's none of her business. I shouldn't need to disclose my complete medical history to stop being harassed about my appearance." I paused, and I'd like to note that what Jill was doing constitutes sexual harassment under the Equality Act. She was making repeated, unwanted comments about my breasts. That's sexual harassment regardless of context. The room went very quiet. Richard stood up. "Thank you for being so thorough and prepared. We'll review all the evidence and we'll make a decision on how to proceed." He shook my hand. "You'll hear from us once we've completed the investigation." I gathered my folder and left. I sat at my desk and started updating my CV. I was prepared to start job hunting. About an hour later, Tom was called to HR, then Marcus, then Priya, then Emma. Each person at the lunch table was interviewed. I watched this process unfold over several hours. Each person who'd written a statement was called in, interviewed, and came back. The office was buzzing with tension. By 3:30, everyone who'd written a statement had been interviewed. Then at 3:45, Jill was called to HR. She was gone for about 30 minutes. When she came back, she was fuming. She marched to her desk and glared at me the whole time. At 4:30, Jill was called back to HR. 5 o'clock came, people started packing up. Jill stormed back into the office. She went straight to her desk and started packing. Everything, her photos, her mug, her desk plant. She was shoving everything into a box with jerky movements. The office went silent. Jill noticed the attention. "I hope you're all happy," she announced loudly. "She got me fired," she pointed at me. "Over a joke. I got fired over a bloody joke." She grabbed her box and disappeared into the lift. My email pinged. It was from Richard. Subject: case closed. Following a thorough investigation into the complaint filed against you, we have determined that no disciplinary action is warranted. The matter has been resolved and your case is now closed. I read it 3 times, then I closed my laptop and went home. The next morning, I walked into the office expecting something dramatic. Instead, it was almost normal. People said good morning. Emma gave me a hug. A few people stopped by to say they were glad things had worked out. Over the next few days, I pieced together what had happened. Richard and Steve had spent hours reviewing everything. They'd watched the CCTV footage, which clearly showed Jill gesturing at my chest. They'd read all 16 statements. They'd reviewed my medical records, which confirmed everything. Then they'd interviewed each witness. Everyone confirmed my version of events. Several people had also mentioned feeling uncomfortable with Jill's other comments about coworkers' appearances. The anti-Semitic remark was particularly damning. By the time they'd called Jill in, the evidence was overwhelming. She'd tried to claim she was just joking, but when confronted with 16 statements and CCTV footage, she couldn't maintain that position. She was terminated for sexual harassment, creating a hostile work environment, and violating the company's code of conduct. Debbie was also reprimanded for failing to disclose her conflict of interest and for apparently knowing about Jill's behavior but not intervening. Richard sent out an email to the entire office the following week, reminding everyone of the zero-tolerance policy for harassment. It encouraged people to report inappropriate behavior immediately. The email felt like a vindication. In the weeks that followed, I thought a lot about what had happened. Some people criticized me for how I handled it. They say I was too aggressive in the lunchroom, that I humiliated her unnecessarily. To those people I say I tried the polite route. I asked Jill to stop 4 separate times over 3 months. I was professional, I was patient, and she ignored me every time. The lunchroom confrontation wasn't planned. It was a breaking point. And honestly, if I hadn't explained my medical history, I'm not sure anyone would have taken the harassment seriously. Some people say I was ruthless in how I documented everything, that I set Jill up. But here's the thing, I didn't set Jill up. Jill's own behavior is what got her fired. All I did was document it. If she'd stopped when I asked her to, none of this would have happened. I didn't get Jill fired, Jill got Jill fired. What I did was protect myself. I knew that going into an HR meeting unprepared would be disastrous, so I prepared, I gathered evidence, I exercised my contractual rights, I presented a clear, factual case. That's not ruthless, that's competent self-advocacy. I've also thought about whether I should have disclosed my medical history earlier. If I'd told Jill about the cancer scare the first time, would she have stopped? Maybe, but I don't think I should have had to. My medical history is private. I shouldn't need to explain decisions about my own body to be treated with basic respect at work. The cancer history made Jill look worse, certainly, but even if I'd gotten implants purely for cosmetic reasons, her behavior still would have been inappropriate. You don't get to comment on coworkers' bodies, period. The cancer history added context, but it wasn't the issue. The issue was the harassment. This experience taught me several important lessons. First, document everything. I cannot stress this enough. If I hadn't kept notes, if I hadn't collected those statements, if I hadn't known my contract, I would have been unprepared. Documentation is power. Second, know your rights. That clause about impartial overseers saved me. If Debbie had been the only person reviewing that complaint, I genuinely believe I would have been fired. Know what protections your contract gives you. Third, people will surprise you. Some people I thought were friends stayed silent. Some people I barely knew went out of their way to support me. Fourth, bullies often have enablers. Jill had been making inappropriate comments for months. People had complained to Debbie, and nothing had been done because they were friends. That enabling allowed the behavior to continue. Fifth, sometimes you have to fight for yourself. I spent 3 months trying to handle things quietly and politely, but quiet and polite wasn't working. Sometimes you have to be loud. You have to stand up for yourself, even if it's uncomfortable. Sixth, prepare for the worst. When I walked into that HR meeting, I genuinely thought I might be fired. I'd updated my CV. I'd mentally prepared. That mindset helped me stay calm. Finally, your mental health matters. I got those implants because I couldn't function without them. I was severely depressed, couldn't look at myself, couldn't leave my apartment. The implants weren't vanity, they were survival. I made a medical decision to improve my mental health, and it worked. My confidence came back, my depression lifted. I could live my life again, and I refused to be ashamed of that choice. This story isn't just about me and Jill, it's about something bigger. It's about how women's bodies are policed and judged in ways that men's bodies aren't. It's about how cosmetic surgery is stigmatized. There's this assumption that any woman who gets cosmetic surgery is vain or shallow, never mind the actual reasons. It's about how we treat cancer survivors. I shouldn't have needed to disclose my cancer history to be treated with respect. It's about workplace power dynamics. Jill felt comfortable harassing me partly because she had friends in HR. She thought she was untouchable. It's about believing victims. If Richard had dismissed my complaint, Jill would have faced no consequences. The fact that he took it seriously made all the difference. It's about standing up for yourself even when it's hard. And it's about the ripple effects of speaking out. After Jill was fired, 2 other people came forward with complaints about different coworkers. They'd been afraid before because they'd seen how Debbie protected Jill, but seeing that the system could work gave them courage. One of those complaints led to another termination. The other led to a formal warning. The office culture shifted. People became more aware of what was appropriate. HR became more vigilant. My situation became a catalyst for broader change. That wasn't my goal, but it was a meaningful outcome. But I want to be honest, standing up for yourself comes with costs. Yes, I won. Yes, justice was served, but it wasn't free. For weeks after, I was anxious every time I walked into the office. Some people were supportive, but others kept their distance. I think they were afraid of getting involved in drama. I lost some friendships, people who had been friendly before suddenly weren't. I had nightmares for months. Dreams where I was back in that HR meeting but without my evidence, where I was being fired, where Jill was laughing at me. I second-guessed myself constantly. Had I handled it right? Should I have done something differently? Even though rationally I knew I'd done the right thing, emotionally I struggled with guilt. My therapist told me this is normal, that standing up to bullies often comes with psychological aftermath. We worked through it together and eventually the nightmares stopped, but it took time. There was also the emotional cost of reliving the trauma, having to explain to HR about the cancer scare and the mastectomy and the depression multiple times, having to let them access my medical records, having to put the most vulnerable, painful period of my life under a microscope. That was hard, really hard. Every time I told the story, I relived it. It would have been easier to just quit, but I fought anyway because it was the right thing to do. It's been 4 years now since all of this happened. I'm 32. I still work at the same company, though I've been promoted and now work in a different department. The office culture is genuinely better. HR takes complaints more seriously. There's mandatory annual training on workplace harassment. Richard is still the HR supervisor, and I respect how he handled my case. I rarely think about Jill anymore. Occasionally, someone new joins and someone tells them the story, usually in hushed tones. I'm always the brave one who stood up for herself in these retellings, which feels reductive. I wasn't brave, I was just documented. Emma is still my friend. We did go on that holiday to Spain. It was lovely. We don't joke about airport security and implants anymore, though. I've had conversations with other people dealing with workplace harassment. I've shared my story, explained what I did, emphasized the importance of documentation. Some took my advice, some didn't. I understand either way. Not everyone has the energy or resources to fight. Not everyone's situation has clear-cut evidence. Not everyone works somewhere where HR will investigate properly. I got lucky in some ways. I had supportive coworkers willing to write statements. I had a contract with protective clauses. I had an HR supervisor who took it seriously. Not everyone has those advantages. But I also made my own luck. I documented everything. I knew my rights. I prepared thoroughly. I presented my case clearly. Those were choices I made, and they mattered. My implants are still there, obviously. Sometimes I forget they're not real in the traditional sense. They feel real. They let me live my life without constant psychological pain. They served their purpose. The scars underneath are still there too, hidden but there. Sometimes I think about them as a metaphor. The trauma is still there under the surface, even when you can't see it, but it's hidden now, managed, no longer the dominant feature of my existence. I'm okay with that. Not everything needs to be visible. Not everything needs to be explained. I've learned that I don't owe anyone my medical history, my trauma, or my story unless I choose to share it. People sometimes ask me if I'd do it all again, knowing the stress, the anxiety, the cost. Yes, absolutely yes. Because the alternative was continuing to be harassed. The alternative was letting Jill face no consequences. The alternative was teaching everyone that harassment was acceptable if you had the right friends in HR. By fighting, I didn't just protect myself. I made the workplace better for everyone. I sent a message that harassment has consequences. I encouraged other victims to come forward. I forced HR to take complaints seriously. Was it worth the nightmares and stress? Yes, because the alternative was worse. I also want to say to anyone in a similar situation, you don't have to fight if you're not able to. Sometimes the healthiest thing is to leave, find a new job, protect your mental health, and move on. There's no shame in that. Fighting isn't always possible or advisable. But if you do choose to fight, be prepared, document everything, know your rights, collect evidence, build your case, don't go into battle without armor. And know that even if you win, it will be hard. Standing up for yourself is never easy, but it can be worth it. For me, the most meaningful moment wasn't when Jill got fired. It wasn't when my case was closed. It wasn't even when Richard shook my hand. It was about 6 months later. I was in the women's bathroom when a coworker I barely knew, a young woman who'd started after the incident, approached me. "I heard about what you did," she said quietly. "With the harassment complaint, I just wanted to say thank you. Someone in my last job did something similar to me, and I didn't know I could fight back. I just quit. But hearing your story, knowing that people can stand up for themselves and win, it helps, so thank you." Then she left. I stood there at the sink looking at my reflection, and for the first time in a long time I felt proud, not of how I looked but of what I'd done, of the choice I'd made to fight, of the example I'd set. That moment made all of it worth it.